Alright, we're going to be discussing gesture drawing today. I'm using a 2B pencil, but really any drawing utensil can be utilized for gesture drawing. One of the first things you'll notice is how I'm holding the pencil. I'm not holding it like I'm writing or taking notes. I'm holding it with my pencil underneath my hand. This forces me to draw with my entire shoulder and arm rather than just my knuckles. By drawing with your arm and shoulder, you have more freedom with your movements and line placement. It forces you to loosen up and allows a lighter line to be drawn. If this style of holding a drawing utensil is new to you, practice it. It will come in handy as your creative career develops. I should not be trying to outline the subject, but rather use shapes to help define and learn about the subject. As I bring the pencil to the drawing paper, I am working quickly and lightly. I am looking to define broad shapes rather than small details. Oftentimes, I will have lines that are crossing into the middle of the subject that aren't physically there. These lines help to create volume and dimension while showing my process of understanding the subject. As I start creating a gesture drawing for this tape dispenser, I'm wanting to quickly get the entire shape of the subject down on the paper. I'm paying attention to the angles of lines drawn. I'm primarily looking at the subject itself with quick glances to my paper. The more time I spend on the gesture drawing, the more I can double check angles, check curves, and start adding details. As I become more confident with my gesture, my lines become darker. Even further along in the gesture process, I'm still looking at my subject just as much, continually double checking my angles, curves, and proportions while becoming more confident with my gesture drawing. Here we go, creating a gesture of a key. Again, I'm starting to draw very lightly and quickly. I use broad shapes to get the overall form of the subject. I continue to look at my subject, starting to notice aspects of my drawing that I need to change, and, changing them. The longer I work on the gesture, the more detailed and definitive my lines get. I still do not change the way I'm holding my pencil. The gesture is a way to explore your subject and learn how to draw it. Rarely will I use an eraser while creating a gesture. Typically, your lines are light enough that you can just work over top of them. Oftentimes, the aesthetic of misplaced lines or measuring lines can be quite charming. It allows the viewer to see your thought process. When I typically think of gesture drawing, my mind assumes I will be drawing a figure. This process can be slightly more complex, but it is definitely a necessity when drawing a model from observation. That said, I will be using two small toys as my models here. The downside of using toys for this is that it becomes harder to place an emphasis on the pose of the figure. When I look at a model from observation, I can more readily feel the weight placement of their pose and can relate to how that pose might feel. While the subject here is more complicated, the approach basically stays the same. I use broad shapes to get the form down in its entirety. I work quickly and lightly. The more time I put into the gesture drawing, the more I'm checking what I've already drawn, checking angles, shapes, curves, and proportions. I realized that I made Gerald a little too thick here. Instead of taking out my eraser and starting that part over, I would just make some marks to shade this area in, indicating where his back stops. My last example is shown completely in real time, so you can take notice of how much the gesture drawing is completed in a set time frame. Now, I'm not working under any time constraints. If I had a time constraint of, say, only 30 seconds, my marks would be much quicker. That being said, even at the 60-second mark, the entire form is already implied. The essence of the figure's stance is down on the paper now. During the next minute, I'm working my way through the figure, double checking shapes, angles, curves, and proportions. In this minute, I'm adding in more details to the drawing. My lines become slightly heavier as I become more confident in what I have laid down. However, I do continue to hold my pencil in the same manner. I spend more time focusing on the clothing, hair, and face. The beauty of gesture drawing is that it enables you to draw just about anything quickly. The process stays the same no matter what you are trying to draw. In the end, you can see a visual record of what you learned while exploring your subject. And there you have it, a 3-minute and 20-second gesture drawing.